As you can see, we'll welcome everybody today. I'm just so glad everybody is here. Just a few things, just a friendly reminder, make sure everybody knows that, again, we do have our adult Bible study downstairs after the service, and we just hope everybody joins us, not only just for that, but also we hope everybody joins us today at the Worleys. That's at 3 o'clock. And then also a reminder, there is no no Wednesday night Bible study, anything like that, because of our trunk or treat. So join us on Wednesday here in our parking lot, pull up your car, hand out candy, have some hot dogs. We did that especially for Gino, because last year he was upset there was no hot dogs, so this year we just gave him a bun last year. Just use your imagination. So, again, we just want to make sure everybody joins us for that. So, again, we're going to continue what I call the Sermon on the River, or what Jesus called Sermon on the Plain. I just liked, it was a flat area, and last time I looked, the river is a flat area. And so we're going to talk about something interesting today. Again, love my enemy. And you can see it's a question. Love my enemy? And so we're going to talk about that today. Bob Poole is a great poet, and I love his poems, but every now and then you can run across a great limerick. This is a good one, a clean one. And it goes, there once was two cats from Kilkenny. Each thought there was one cat too many. They fought and they spit and they clawed and they bit, till instead of two cats, there were any. So, again, now that strikes me funny. As I read it, I said, this fits perfect in what we want to talk about today. I mean, I can picture two cats fighting. I don't know if you ever got an opportunity to see or hear, most of the time, hear at night two cats going at it, maybe in a backyard or an alley, the noise that they can make. And so, in fact, I love this, I never know why, but cats are known for fighting, and even when if two women get in a fight, it's usually known as a, thank you very much, a cat fight. Cats are cats, and cats are going to act like that. But Christians, would we behave in such a manner? Yes, I'm afraid so. We do. There's a church in Ohio called the Bethlehem Church of Christ. It was built in the 1840s. And there's records that they kept during the Civil War and just after. And you still can go back and read them. And as I was doing this, it was pretty interesting, because this is what one of the entries said. We had fighting right here at home as the Civil War was going on. The Democrats and the Republicans were so bitter against one another, it broke the church up. On the same page, on the bottom, it wrote that, again, we're told of a fist fight that took place inside the church. And it says, two of our best men fought to the finish. One wanted to know if the other had enough, and it said, yes, he did, and so we let him up. They were fighting inside the church. Unlike those two cats from Kilkenny, this isn't as funny as that limerick. And why isn't it funny? Because Christians aren't supposed to behave this way. Christians are supposed to be people of love and peace and care for everybody. But too often, Christians aren't. They're not always loving. They're not always peaceful. Jesus knew exactly what was going to happen. And he left us very, very explicit instructions. He says, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. Now, why? Why would Jesus tell us this? Well, there's got to be a couple reasons. First, Jesus didn't save us because we were nice people. Jesus saved us because we're sinners. As Romans 3:23 says, we all fall short of the glory of God. This means that you're a sinner, I'm a sinner, and Jesus saved us because of this. And when we become Christians, God calls us to leave our sinful lifestyles can create something new. This is what Paul wrote in Titus. It says, "At one time we too were foolish, disobedient, deceived, and enslaved by all kinds of passions and pleasures. We lived in malice and envy, being hating one another." The problem is that when Christians misbehave, they're just doing what they learned prior to becoming a Christian, before God saved them. Sometimes we get these little flashbacks, fall back a little bit. Sometimes some certain habits are really, really hard to break. Now, it doesn't make it right. It just sometimes explains sometimes some of the things that we do. Secondly, Jesus commands us to love our enemies because that kind of a thing doesn't come naturally to us. Love your neighbor. In fact, Jesus' command doesn't even seem to make any kind of sense if you think about it. I mean, do you really notice who God is commanding us to love? He is telling us to love our enemies. I mean, really, love our enemies? Do good to those who hate us? Bless those who curse us? Pray for those who mistreat us? Now, Jesus said a lot of surprising things, but nothing as revolutionary as this. Nothing even close. History tells us a completely different picture. This is a great reversal of everything that was taught since ancient times. If we look back, Hammurabi, who was known for his code that he placed all over his kingdom, said, "An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." Read the law that Moses gave. If there is serious injury, you are to take a life for a life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot, burn for a wound for a wound, a bruise for a bruise. There's probably a lot of people walking around all beat up, going by this. Ancient Sparta. No retreat, no surrender. This is Spartan law. And by Spartan law, we will stand and fight and die. My father taught us, hit first and hit hard. I always said this about my brother, Steve. And I said this at his eulogy. One thing about my brother Steve, he touched a lot of people in his life. Some a lot harder than others. In modern America, there is the new golden rule, which says, "He who has the gold sets the rules." But Jesus said, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. Now, why? Why on earth would I want to love my enemies? I mean, really, that's the reason they are my enemies. Because I don't like them. I mean, if I liked them, then they wouldn't be my enemies. And if I don't like them, I'm certainly going to have a hard time trying to love them. And this is what Jesus is trying to tell us. So naturally, Jesus' command seems so illogical. It seems so irrational. All I can say is, seriously? You want me to do what? Seriously. It doesn't make sense. And people struggle with it because it doesn't seem normal. Why would Jesus tell us to love people who are our enemies? Why would he tell us to do such a thing? I mean, really, think about this. Love our enemies. At this time he was talking to the Jews, which meant love the Romans. As we move through history, it's telling the citizens of Northern Ireland, hey, love the Catholics and the Protestants. It's talking to these people in war-torn former Yugoslavia. Hey, love those Muslims, love those Serbs. He's telling us for people everywhere. What does he tell us? He tells us that it includes murderers, rapists, child abusers, thieves, cheaters, hit-and-run drivers, slanderers, and even politicians who just seems just to turn your blood. In modern America, this list might include the boss who just makes your life miserable. Maybe it's a former spouse who turned a child custody battle into one of the worst experiences of your life. It could be a teenage son or daughter who tore your family apart. It could be a teacher who falsely accused you of something, maybe failed you, or even maybe got you kicked out of school. It could be a coach who never played you, or maybe just cut you from the team. It might even be a minister who turned your family and friends against you. It just might be a next-door neighbor who repeatedly threatened you or your family. It just might be a creditor who drove you into bankruptcy. It could be a doctor whose malpractice stole your health. A stockbroker who lost your life savings. A fiance who cheated on you and broke up the engagement. It could be just as simple as a bully who beat up your child. Jesus said that these are the people we Christians are to love. But how am I supposed to love someone that I really, really don't like? Well, first of all, because that's what God does. If we look at Luke 35:36, but love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you will be the sons of the Most High. For he himself is kind to ungrateful and evil men. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. In other words, when we love our enemies, we show the world exactly what God is all about. God loved his enemies. And that's a great thing. That's a wonderful thing if you think about it. Because at one time, I was an enemy of God. Colossians tells us, once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish, and free from accusations. In Ephesians, Paul says almost the same thing. Like the rest, we were by nature deserving of God's wrath, but because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ. Even when we are dead in transgressions, it is by grace you have been saved. Now that truth leads us to another reason, maybe why we need to try to love our enemies. When God loved us, he had something in his mind. He had an end game. God has a plan. God's love for us resulted in him doing something unbelievable for us. And what was the result of this love for us? As Colossians just said, his love for us led us being reconciled. His love for us, his enemy at one time, led us to being saved. It was his love for us, who we were an enemy at one time, wanted to give us eternal life. That was God's end game. You see, that's God's plan for us. And now that we become God's children, God tells us that he wants us to love our enemies. If God's love for us led to our salvation, why do you think his objective is to have us love our enemies? Think about that. Why? What's the plan? What are you doing, God? And God says, again, I sent you because it's through you that you can bring these people to salvation. God has saved us, and now he enlists us. He enlists us to go out there. He sent us so that we can reconcile the lost. He sends us so that our enemies can be saved. It's through us that these people can find eternal life. In essence, God trusts you. God believes in you. Jesus gave us a command to go into all the world, teaching, baptizing, loving, forgiving. He said, go into all the world, to all people. There's not a list, nowhere you're going to read it except for. It's not going to be there. God has enlisted us, each and every one of us, to be a missionary to the lost. There was an article I read, and it compared the cost of what it cost to kill an enemy on the battlefield to the cost of saving them by sending a missionary overseas. The average price to kill one soldier in World War II was $200,000. In Vietnam, it was $500,000. And most recently, they looked, the average cost to save a soul overseas is $654. To me, that's a pretty good bargain. That's a really good bargain. How much better it would be to convert our nation's enemies to Christianity, to Christ, than to shoot them down in the heat of battle. If they became our Christian brothers and sisters, we'd probably be a lot less likely to be going to war. But if you're God's missionary here, in your family, if you're God's missionary in your neighborhood, or in work, or wherever the cost, we're going to find out that the cost is absolutely zero. Nothing. Nada. I want you to do a little experiment here. I want you to think for me for a little bit. I want you to imagine this right now. You're sitting in a dark waiting room. There's a single door opening that goes out into the hallway. You're alone in that room, and all of a sudden you start hearing footsteps. And they're coming down the hall, and they're coming closer and closer. The doorknob turns, and somebody walks into the room. This person or persons that just walked into the room is someone you love more than anyone else in the world. Who do you see? What person just came into your mind that walked through that door that you just love more than anything? Let's go back to our imagination a little bit. You're back into that same room. It's dark. One door. You're waiting, and you hear footsteps again. The door opens, and in walks a person or persons you hate more than anything in this world. If you ever had an enemy, there they are, standing in that doorway. Who do you see? Are you thinking of an enemy that maybe you have in your neighborhood or maybe family? Somebody at work? How many of you, just do a little raise of a hand, you don't have to go, oh, I got somebody right here. How many of you actually pictured somebody when I said enemy? No one. That's really good. Thank you. Some people going, yeah, I got some visual pictures right here that just poof, trying to get them out of my head, but poof, there they are. But you can see the genius in all this. What was God trying to teach us? It costs nothing for you to be a missionary to those people you don't like. Nothing. Well, that's not actually true. It won't cost you anything, but the risk is a lot in doing this. You risk being ridiculed. You risk being insulted. You even risk being hurt by these people. That's the cost for you being willing to rescue someone who is your enemy. You see, God loved us while we were still his enemy so that he could save us. And now God calls you and I to love our enemies so that he might save them for eternal damnation. He wants to stop that from happening, and so he's asking us to do this. Well, Jesus gives an insight to this battle plan that he has. And again, how are we supposed to do this? How's it going to look? How are we going to get into this mindset? Because he said, do to others as you would have them do to you. And what is that again? You probably saw it already up there. What's that called? The golden rule. The golden rule. Again, this is what Jesus gave. In fact, there's a lot of folks out there who think Jesus didn't come up with that. They said, no, wait a minute. I know Jesus said it, but a lot of people have said it way before Jesus came on the scene. He's not the first one who said that. And so as we look through history, Confucius, 500 years before the birth of Christ, said, do not unto others what you would not wish done to yourself. Buddha said, putting oneself in the place of others, kill not, nor cause to kill. In the Mahabharata, part of the literature of Hinduism, it says, do not unto others which could cause you pain if done to you. The ancient Greeks, way before the birth of Christ, said, you should not do to others what you would not want them done to you. Well, there you have it. Undeniable proof that others said the same thing Jesus did hundreds and hundreds of years before he said it. Or is it? I want you to look at this very carefully because it's not the same. Notice the words I emphasize in all these. Do not. The not. By contrast, Jesus said, do. Those ancients were all saying something like, if you don't want to have someone hurt you, don't hurt them. Leave them alone, and they'll leave you alone. By contrast, Jesus said, don't you leave them alone. Deliberately do things for these people. But there's one more thing we need to know about this golden rule. It's just not great advice that Jesus gave us. As Christians, it has to be our battle cry. It has to be what we stand for. The golden rule is intended God to be our battle plan so we could show love to our enemies. Let me explain just a little bit different. Let me just break this down a little bit. What am I talking about here? Do unto others who don't like you as you would have them do unto you, but you know they won't. Do this before they can do the devious deed to you, and that they would do if given the chance. Shame them with goodness. Kill them with kindness. In other words, do what they would not do for you. And this is important. Why? Why am I asking? Because that's the last thing that these people are going to expect you to do. They expect you to play the same game that they play. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That's the game that they play. That's the game that most people understand. But by doing good to them, it throws them completely off their game. Completely. It's the kind of radical love that requires treating others as we wish to be treated. A radical kind of love. Something completely revolutionary. When Jesus said this, it blew the minds of these people. Because we have to understand the golden rule is of no use to you whatsoever. None, unless you realize that it's your move. You need to do. You need to go out there and help, regardless of what's happening out there. So again, Jesus confronts our selfishness because to obey this principle, we must think of others and not of ourselves. How will that other person feel? How would I feel if I were in their place? You see, the golden rule completely destroys selfishness. Completely destroys it. Loving self is the root of all our conflicts and relational problems. Why? Why are we so sensitive so that we get our feelings hurt? Because we love self more than we love other people. Why do we get so angry and demand our rights? Because we love ourselves more than we love that other person. Why do we blow up or clam up and don't want to talk through anything and hold these grudges and hold them in? Because we love ourselves more than we love other people. Contrary to current wisdom, we do not need to learn to love ourselves because God already loves us. We are already God's children, and that's enough. We need to regard others more important than ourselves. Ian read this today. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should not look not only to your own interest, but also to the interest of others. Even if the other person is wrong, ask yourself, how would I want to be treated if I was wrong? You treat that person the way the way you want to be treated. But the main point here, what we need to get, is that Jesus has asked us to love our neighbors so that we can bring them to Jesus Christ. when we show God's radical love by being kind to those who mistreat us, by treating others as we wish to be treated, by giving them when there's nothing in it for us, that's showing God's radical love. Sometimes when you're doing these things, the world takes notice. And they're going to look and say, why are you doing this? Why? What makes you so different? That's when the door opens. And you can talk about God's love. You can talk about what Jesus has done to you, how you were in that same boat. But I don't have the time to hate. I don't have the time to hold grudges. All I have the time for is to show God's love, to show God's mercy, to show God's grace. As it says in Luke, but love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you'll be sons of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and evil. Be merciful even as your Father is merciful. One last thought. The way God showed love for us was that same way. We were all his enemies. And John 3:16 tells us, for God so loved the world that what? He gave. He gave. And that's the key. And sometimes we forget that word. For God so loved the world that he gave. He gave his son for us who were sinners so that we can have everlasting life. And we forget that word there, gave, because that is the central part of it. He's asking us to give. Loving your enemies involves giving them something they need more or what they would like to have. God gave us his son. We need to give. We need to be given. We talk about being a living church. It's not the building, it's who's here. And we need to be known that we are giving church. What are you going to give your enemies? We cannot forget God's love and what God gave to us. Romans 5:8 said, God demonstrated his love towards us in that while we were yet still sinners, God died for us. God died. He sent Christ to die for us. This is how much he loved us. That's the radical love of Jesus Christ. That he would offer himself in place of sinners who ignored him. Look what it was like, his life when he was here at the end. The rejection. The beatings. The awful things that were done to Jesus Christ. And he refused to let any of them separate him from his Father. He refused to let any of them separate his love from them. Because what did he say as they were pounding those nails? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. The only way you can begin to love others with Jesus is to trust in him. Trust in his love and trust in God. Let's just go back a little bit. And I know some of you didn't raise a hand, but when I said, who do you see? That enemy. I want you to pray for the opportunity for that person to help you to forgive, to help you show love, to give you a forgiving heart. Pray to be Christ-like. Because what if on the last day, and you're sitting now, what is the questions might be asked to you? I don't think it's going to be, did you follow all the rules? I think it's going to be, have you shown mercy? You know, we're not sure what questions God will require us to answer as our lives end, but we do know that we'll have to give account for every idle word that we spoke. Matthew 12:36 says, but I tell you that men will have to give account on the day of judgment for every careless word that has been spoken. You know, it's the action, not the fruit of the action that's important. It's planting the seed that's important. You have to do the right thing. It may not be in your power. It might not be in your time frame. And you might never even see any fruit grown by the seed that you planted. But that doesn't mean you stop doing the right thing, or saying the right thing, or loving Jesus as he loved us. You may never, ever know the results from your actions, but if you do absolutely nothing, then there will never be any results. As I call up the singers, I want to close with this true story. It was 10 years after World War II ended, and some Christians from West Germany met with some Christians from Warsaw, Poland. And this Christian from West Germany wanted to know if it would be possible for a group of Christians from Germany to come to Poland to apologize for the brutality inflicted upon the Poles during World War II. The Polish Christians, to a man, refused even considering meeting with the Germans. Their quote was, "The wounds are still too fresh." This is 10 years after the war. "The wounds are still too fresh," said one of the men. With tear, you could just tell in his voice, the pain in his voice. He said, "Every stone in Warsaw is stained with Polish blood from either a German bullet or a German bayonet." The German Christian accepted the answer and says, "Before I go, could we say the Lord's Prayer together?" And he nodded, "Yes. Yes, we can." And they all began to recite the Lord's Prayer. But when they got to the point it said, "And forgive us our debts as we forgive," and that's where it stopped. It stopped, and there was dead silence. No one could go on. And one of the Polish Christians who had been most passionate about this in his rejection, he said, "This is so difficult, but I'm so sorry." As he looked at the Germans, "I am so sorry, but I cannot begin to forgive, and I cannot pray that prayer. I can't. I can't do it." Well, a year later, they decided to meet again. And this time, they finished the prayer together. And only then did the healing begin. Only then were their hearts opened and the healing began. You can't effectively love your enemy the way Jesus wants us to until you first belong to him. We need to accept Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior because through him, through the gift of the Holy Spirit, we then have the gift to understand what he's talking about. The gift of forgiveness, the gift of love. Jesus' teaching in Luke 6 that we talk about is some of the most difficult teachings in the Bible. Sometimes could we just remove that part? Because you're asking me to do something that's so difficult to do. It goes against everything that this world has taught us about sticking up for ourselves, about fighting back. But to harbor hatred toward an enemy is not only un-Christ-like, it's soul-killing. I love this quote. It's like choosing a poison for your enemy and then drinking it yourself. We've been called to be better than the world. We've been called to show God's radical love. The love that found you and me, one time a sinner, and it was through God's love and God's gift that he gave us mercy and he gave us grace. That's the love that has to flow through us to those who mistreated us. We've been called to imitate Jesus Christ. This is what our call is to imitate who Jesus is, to have that love, to have that mercy, to understand that I was a sinner and you forgave me. Now it's my chance, because when Jesus rose from the dead, he was only here for 40 days, and he rose and he looked up. This is what you need to do. I set the example, now follow it. It's up to you. It's up to us to show mercy to people who might never ever see it or feel it. It's up to us to love. It's up to us to forgive, because that's what Jesus asked us to do. That is being Christ-like. Let's go to the Lord in prayer.